Hello, my name is Linda Pecora. Welcome to Information Preservation, as understood by me, Heather Laribee, and Rebecca Garcia. First, what is information preservation? It's the act of storing details and objects so that future users will be able to use the data and interpret it without the original user to explain it to them. The way an object looks and feels needs to be preserved. Objects can be stored digitally or in physical locations like stacks or rooms in public libraries. Digital collections tend to need to be updated about every 3 to 5 years. Here are a few reasons why information preservation is important. If we don't preserve our current information, it will be a great loss for future generations and for the humanities. Preserving things like local histories lets users see the viewpoints of people who have been left out of mainstream history, and it lets people access information they may not have had access to before. We will touch on this again as we delve into what information professionals such as librarians do. It's especially important for digital information, since digital information is not as robust and long-lasting as people think it is. These are some issues associated with information preservation. Physical storage is finite and materials degrade over time. Digital technology is fragile. As digital technologies quickly advance, file formats often lack backward compatibility. How does preserving information fit into the information lifecycle? The information lifecycle consists of identifying information needs, acquiring materials to meet information needs, organization, storage, designing materials, distribution, and use. Even though libraries aren't typically involved in the creation of information, libraries help users organize and store local history collections. Storage and dissemination, such as publicizing and marketing local history collections through social media, are a part of the information lifecycle. Where do local history collections in public libraries fit in? Libraries have to create a place to store digital and physical information objects for their local history collections. Local history collections highlight overlooked histories. Being able to organize this kind of information often requires special acquisitions beyond traditional library materials, and library staff may also need to be trained to create these kinds of collections. We will talk about this more as we move on. What role do public librarians play in information preservation, especially with regard to local history? In broadest terms, they collaborate. They create a network of users, friends of the library, their board and other community members, colleagues, and other professionals such as museum curators and organizations like the Image Permanence Institute, Heritage Preservation, and the Society of American Archivists. Thus, they aren't making decisions in a vacuum, but are communicating with experts and the users they seek to best serve. Librarians plan. They research to understand the historical underpinnings of their local community. Together with their network, they write a mission statement to define the purpose and the parameters of their collection. They write policies, including an acquisitions policy. They make space for their collection on the library's webpage. They create a workspace sufficient in size for patrons to use the collection. They devise a detailed budget to include acquisition, processing, preservation, staff, reproduction, reformatting, and digitalization costs. Librarians evaluate. They evaluate items in light of their budget, their mission, their building's climate, their space, and what items should or would be duplicated by area libraries and museums. Costs and benefits in relation to the value of the items must be weighed. This evaluation process is done for physical items as well as for web-based content. It must be considered that even local newspapers are now often digital. Choosing what to preserve is no small feat in today's environment of ubiquitous information against a backdrop of a world where, not long ago, preservation was meant mainly for the rare, the unique, and the fragile. Although librarians are working in partnership, Deciding where and how to allocate resources requires vision and leadership. Public librarians democratize. As we noted in the introduction, previously marginalized people and everyday people can be a part of history through the library. Librarians preserve information and information objects both physically and digitally. Across the country, libraries are scanning and making digital copies of yearbooks available online. Newspapers and other flat historical documents are being scanned and digitally preserved. Detailed maps of local graveyards are kept in public libraries, probably as strictly reserved material. Experts are calling for more digitalization of cemetery records. In fact, there's an app at www.billiongraves.com that allows smartphones to take photographs with latitude and longitude. Volunteers at the site then transcribe crumbling monument information. Even scrapbooks are being tenderly protected. Let's touch on some aspects of digital preservation. Digital software preservation doesn't mean just saving a thumb drive. It entails saving the hardware required to make the thumb drive work. The hardware, software, and the documentation to get it to all work and interpret the results will need to be preserved. The following are options for digital preservation. File format migration. File format migration occurs when digital objects are converted into a different file format deemed trustworthy by the Digital Preservation Repository for long-term preservation. Emulation. Simply put, emulation is making one computer system copy the workings of another computer system. Virtualization. Virtualization allows multiple hosted systems to work concurrently. Software translation. Software translation occurs when software is rewritten into a different computer programming language. Librarians create access. Again, we see the democratic process at work. Libraries like Queen's Library, for example, has led the charge in capturing tomorrow's history today. They began a very popular program where users can use an app for crowdsourced information, audio, and visual metadata files that link to Dublin Core, automatically creating a record in the library's digital asset system. Librarians then sift through data and can set it live on their archival website. Users can also access these videos on the Apple App Store for iOS and the Google Store for Android. Other places following the trend of participatory digital preservation are the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project, the New York Public Library's Community Oral History Project, Brooklyn Library's Our Streets, Our Stories project, and the Museum of Chinese in America, who have spearheaded Family Treasures events to help people preserve family memories. The next slide will show you step-by-step Queen Library's guidelines for starting a similar program of your own. To create access for crowdsourcing local happenings in your community, get an access source code on GitHub. That institution will change codes to redirect your digital asset management system or DAMS, or even just a spreadsheet on a cloud that will expand with every submission. Optionally, a library-created application programming interface or API will put selected content on a certain directory in the library's server, such as metadata as on an XML file on the library's DAMS product, such as Vital. The API can be written to be flexible and extensible. This allows for rebranding and publishing for use by patrons on the Apple App Store for iOS and the Google Store for Android. Next, we'll talk about preservation challenges, what information professionals should know when starting a local history collection in a public library. What to collect? A collection will most often be driven by the patron's interests and the local history of the area. Common local history collections contain local newspapers, serials, family histories, and records pertinent to genealogy, such as census records, church records, and local school yearbooks. Other collections that are less commonly collected are business directories, phone books, organization directories, oral histories, and, and ephemera such as political buttons, pamphlets, and playbills. Special local history collections would depend on the history of the area and may involve collections on battles, indigenous people, and industry. What not to collect? Special considerations need to be made before adding these items to a local history collection. Artifacts, scrapbooks, photographs, unofficial memoirs, biographies, financial records, or other personal documents, institutional records, records from an organization. Adding these documents and items to a local history collection can be costly and elevate the collection to an archive, and that comes with a different set of problems. If you decide to go ahead and collect scrapbooks, please keep these things in mind. Scrapbooks are tricky to preserve even for experts due to their multidimensionality and their makeup of various materials. They should be stored boxed in a cool, dry, dark place, 63 to 67 degrees Fahrenheit with a relative humidity of 32 to 53 degrees. Heavy polyester film sheets or 20-point weight cardstock can be used to support pages as they are turned. People should use freshly washed hands or cotton gloves to handle scrapbooks. A cradle can be used to reduce the opening angle of the scrapbook. Copies should be made only by archival staff. If you must make copies, do so with two people so that one person can hold the scrapbook while the other operates the machine. Non-paper items in scrapbooks such as dried flowers and hair may attract mold and insects. Weigh this with the possible damage to the integrity of the book or wear on the book when considering removal of such items. Other options for preserving scrapbooks include making a paper surrogate or facsimile, making copies for the public, and retaining the original artifact. You will need to weigh the cost of a planetary scanner with the possible damage caused by dismantling the scrapbook to use a traditional scanner. You can consider full restoration if the scrapbook is very valuable to your collection. See the Tepper article in the references section for more details. Collection size will depend upon several factors: how much storage the library has to house the collection, the format of the collection, print, microfilm, databases would all require different amounts of storage. How the collection will be disseminated will dictate how many tables, computers, and shelves will be needed to access the collection. If there are special conditions in which the collection must be stored. Formats. Proper storage for fragile records can dictate how a collection can be grown and if it should be added to the library's collection. Newspaper. It should be stored in a dark and dry environment. Humidity and light deteriorate the paper and ink. Microfilm needs to be stored in a dry, temperature-controlled room and packaged tightly to prevent oxidation. Photographs need to be stored in a dark, dry, temperature-controlled room inside an acid-free box and handled by hands that are free of chemicals. All other print items need to be stored in acid-free boxes, preferably in polyester sleeves, and handled by staff wearing gloves free of pollutants. Public libraries are funded on the state and federal level, leaving them to rely on grants and public donations for special collections. Many libraries do not have the funding for a local history collection. There would need to be a collection development policy that dictates how and under what circumstances pieces would be added to the collection. Added costs would be due to archival conditions and accommodations that would need to be made by the library in order to house and preserve these items properly. Staff would need to be trained on access and to handle the materials properly and how to give access and proper handling instruction to patrons. Acquisitions. There would need to be a collection policy in place that addresses donations, gifts, endowments, bequests, borrowed materials. as these factors affect how the materials are accessed, stored, and handled by staff and patrons. Dissemination. Information professionals face the following challenges when organizing and granting access to a local history collection. Determination of how the indexes will be created and sorted, for example, by content, chronologically, by event, alphabetically, and so on. Privacy restrictions to access, copyright ownership and permissions for materials, access to be used in research, safe handling of the items in the collection. Upkeep and maintenance costs of the equipment, databases, digital archives associated with the collection. The final challenge the library faces is proper staffing for the collection. The library would need to decide if there would be one information professional in charge of curating and helping patrons access the collection, or if each staff member would be knowledgeable and trained in those areas. The libraries also must consider keeping staff up to date on services and upkeep of outmoded equipment that may be necessary for accessing the collection. In conclusion, information preservation is the act of safeguarding artifacts and data. It is important for present and future generations to have the opportunity to understand more about life from a different time. Old objects can be fragile and need special care, and digital data is more delicate than many people realize. Information preservation is a critical part of our information life cycle, and it is often up to librarians and other information professionals to make it happen. Information preservation is best handled collaboratively with users, community members, and experts in safe storage. Planning both the philosophy and reasons for your collection and the practical considerations in writing will help make it a success. Public libraries are in a unique position, given the funding and expertise, to set up and maintain local history collections that will be accessible to the public. Everyday voices can be heard and preserved in a part of a library's local history collection. Ways to save memories of the past with simple equipment, climate-controlled storage, and through digitalization have been detailed in this slideshow. There are many modern ways to make history and even today's moments come alive in libraries. Many libraries are now using apps and dams to capture and share crowdsourced information and local events. In conclusion, there is much to take into account when learning to preserve local history. Here are some tips for new librarians. Take it one step at a time to avoid getting overwhelmed. Work collaboratively. It will alleviate some of the worry about making the right choices. Include your users in decision making and have a team of people you can consult with, including some experts in preservation. Take into account what's already being preserved in your neighborhood and what gaps you or your colleagues perceive there may be in local history preservation in your area. Be clear and specific about what donations you are accepting and not accepting and in what format. Refer back to your mission statement and policies when you need clarification. Have a written policy in place about public access to your collection. Weigh the benefits and the costs of each item you consider preserving. With such thoughts in mind, you're sure to be a success.